Hi, I'm Nathan Zampronio, one of your independent councillors on Hawkesbury Council, and I'd like to offer my congratulations to Susan Templeman and commiserations to Mike Creed after the election last night. But I'd like to spend a few minutes talking to you about why the Liberals lost. So I'll put them under these headings: global, national, and local. Globally, in my opinion, this is further evidence of the globalist backlash against Trumpism. What recently happened in Canada, which is the re-election of a left-leaning government that was on the ropes only 6 months ago, has now happened here. That's 2 for 2. So I'm thinking the lesson should be becoming clear. It isn't because conservative values aren't widely held in our community or that they're indefensible as policy positions. It's because the corrupted expression of conservatism that Donald Trump represents is pure electoral poison outside America for anybody who is foolish enough to adopt the feel of his branding. Donald Trump is not a conservative. He is the cancer that is eating conservatism. Conservatism should be about respecting science and ensuring that policy is data-driven rather than ideologically driven. It should be about winning debates in the public square with better arguments rather than complaining endlessly about bias in the media. And it's about having a certain generosity of spirit that means that when you're making public statements or you're on social media is that you don't always play the nasty card. And I think we can think of people that tend to go to that as a default. Any politician who says, "Make Australia great again," links their party to that cancer in the minds of voters. And Australians, being a fairly egalitarian lot, have now comprehensively spat that out. Clive Palmer just spent $60 million on blasting his wonky trumpet just to get under 2% of the vote. Make no mistake, Labor won despite being caught out lying about energy prices, on managing the cost of living crisis badly, on housing policy, and on the disastrous Voice campaign. Nationally, I believe that the Liberals ran a very undisciplined campaign and that they deserved to lose, despite Labor's many flaws. I don't accept the mean-spirited characterisation of Peter Dutton as a humorless or unempathetic leader. Those who know him disprove that. And I think that ad hominem attacks like that are inherently weak. But this election brought two firsts: the ignominy of an opposition leader losing their own seat and of a first-term government increasing their majority. Two things that have never happened in Australia. And I really do think that the Liberal Party needs to own that. On policy, I think they made a number of unforced errors. Look at the trend towards work from home. It isn't a sign of laziness in the workforce, but it is a fundamental shift in our entire society's appraisal of work-life balance that began under COVID. Excessive migration, transport congestion, and people's long commutes mean that work from home has become a permanent feature of our work landscape, especially when most academic studies have now proven that productivity does not need to suffer. And the coalition, for whatever reason, pledged to end it, or at least for the public sector, and then they backflipped. The policy failed not just the pub test, but with the key demographic of working women, and this pledge should have never have seen the light of day. It put a drag on the coalition's vote in every single outer city electorate around the nation. Here's another example. Until January 1st this year, Australia had among the world's worst vehicle emission standards. Our vehicles were twice as polluting as equivalent cars being made in Europe, or being sold in Europe. The new rules finally had us catching up, and yet the Liberals pledged to roll back those changes. It's the kind of thing that makes reasonable people facepalm. The only people who preferred the lax rules were car manufacturers, who made Australia a dumping ground for old, polluting models and obsolete technologies. These Liberal policies were wrong. even while the Liberals were right on other things like reducing migration or introducing nuclear energy. Lastly, I turn to the position of the Macquarie electorate. I lament Macquarie's slide from being a seat that the Liberals held for 62% of the time over the last half century to a safe Labor seat. Not because I'm an ex-Liberal, as somebody who spent 33 years in the Liberal Party and worked for the party and worked for members of Parliament in that party, but because I believe that in our seat, we will always be better off if our seat is a marginal one. I know I've mentioned this before, but it is a blunt reality. There's less funding, less promises, and less listening to local concerns by higher-ups when a seat is safe. And this means that issues that are literally existential threats to us, like flood mitigation, aren't funded or even discussed, and won't be until this seat has a representative who can force it back onto the agenda. I want to give Mike Creed his due. Standing in a seat that your party has given up on is a thankless job. And Mike is a decent bloke, and he's progressive where it matters, but he was effectively hobbled in his ability to run a Liberal campaign in Macquarie because he inherited a campaign account that was $49,000 in debt by Sarah McMahon's disastrous 2022 campaign. She spent a staggering $370,000, and she was the main cause of a swing that was double the size of the national swing against the Libs at that election, which entrenched Susan Templeman's advantage. Mike Creed was starting so far behind the start line that competing was almost impossible. Thanks, Sarah. Worse, I noticed that I only saw the Liberals put out circulars and letterbox material branded by head office. I never saw him run his own messaging, apart from the silly hats. Worse, he accepted, or at least never repudiated, volunteer support from the exclusive brethren. In his position, I would have strongly rejected that because they are a sinister and destructive cult, and whatever manpower they offered was negated by the perception that whenever a voter was handed a how to vote, their focus was distracted in that moment by the thought that they were being handed something by a religious nutcase. It was an unforced error. The parties seem to think these days that their chances of victory are proportional to their ability to wrap every square centimetre of a school in plastic signs. What a ridiculous spectacle. The real work of winning a seat starts with years of community service, networking and listening. And Susan Templeman's diligence and incumbency is formidable. I want the Liberal Party to do better, but at this hour I am out of that circle, and I'm grateful that I don't have to defend the indefensible. Remember, the party in New South Wales has become so dysfunctional that its federal leaders had to intervene, sacking the entirety of its executive and state council because of rampant factionalism and Machiavellian intrigues. Locally, I want you to be in no doubt that there are still malign actors in the Liberal Party, both in the Hawkesbury and in the Blue Mountains. They're the puppet masters, and the sooner they leave the Liberal Party, the better. Yeah. One thing I am confident of is that the voters in electorates now represented by independents will receive better representation and probably more money from the government than they would from either of the major parties. In fact, it reminds me that if you want something done properly, you've just got to do it yourself. I'm considering my position. Thanks for watching.